Token Arthur was always curious about new things. One day, while flying over the jungle, he saw a group of animals exchanging goods and services using colorful stones. So he contacted Fintech CTOs from fantastic companies all around the world and collaborated with them to learn all about finance. Inspired, Arthur asked Insert CEO Vasyl to help start a podcast to share their knowledge with the world. This is what you are watching right now, Fintech CTO Podcast. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Vasyl Soloshchuk. I'm CEO at Insart, and this is the next episode of our Fintech CTO podcast. And we have another great guest today, and let's welcome Arjun Kannan.
Arjun Kannan builds products, businesses, and teams. He is currently building ResiDesk, helping real estate companies forecast renewals, reduce turnover, and hit their budget. Previously, he built and led product and engineering functions at Climb Credit, doubling growth for 3 years straight. He was also a product and engineering leader at BlackRock, creating $40 million in revenue, and helped build multiple startups and small companies before that.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And so look, I know that you like to build the great teams and you like to build lasting companies and also useful products. So Actually, can you give us some examples?
So I think great teams, lasting companies, useful products kind of all go together to me. And I think if I actually had to rewrite that in my bio, I would start with the useful product piece first. I've spent, I would say, most of my career in financial services. My current startup, of course, is more so in the real estate and PropTech space. I think useful is the operative word through which I like to think about everything we do. I think like many other engineers, I think I have been guilty of falling into the trap of building things that are really cool to look at and demo really well, but at the end of it, don't really have a lasting impact on people's lives because they were cool but not useful. And so over the last 10 years, my real goal has been to make things that people find useful. And so what I mean by that is something that actually makes a difference in your everyday life. One of my favorite sayings is that I will solve a problem with a fax machine if I have to. I think for the most part, while we in technology tend to be very focused on the technology, the reality is most people who use products that are enabled by technology don't think twice about what actually underpins it, right? Like the average person using a smartphone doesn't really think too much about the chip manufacturer or the person who wrote the software for it. They just know that it works or it doesn't, that it helps them connect with other people or it doesn't. That's a very big example. But even as a small example, for people who write using pens don't really think about how pens work. They just know that they either work or they don't. And so to me, the operative sort of principle of all product building is, does this help somebody, do their job, live their life, spend less time on something so that they can spend more time on something else. And then from that, I think when you operate with the principle of making things useful, that means you create the opportunity for yourself to build something that lasts. Because of course, if something is useful, it tends to be useful not just in the moment, but for a long time. And when you can do both of those two things, then you can attract great people to work with you. Because if there's anything that I've learned in the last few years, it is that great people care a lot more about the impact that they have as opposed to the ins and outs of their everyday dynamics, right? Like most people who join great companies aren't going there just because they want to work on JavaScript or TensorFlow or OpenAI. Although again, spoiler alert, we definitely do a lot of that stuff. They come in because they get to build a product that has a tangible impact on people's lives. So that's sort of how I think about this. This has influenced everything in my career, from my time at BlackRock, where we focused on building products. The fancy way to to talk about them was building analytical products for portfolios so that we could manage their risk. The simple way to talk about it is we help people who manage other people's money make sure that they know how they're managing that money. And that really matters because it's useful, because I really care when somebody's managing my money that they're not doing anything that I don't want them to do with my life savings, right? So that's the useful part. That's the lasting part that attracts the great teams. Similarly, when we last spoke, I was CTO, head of product at a company called Climb Credit. At a high level, what the company did was provide sort of, unique underwriting to help people going to non-traditional schools get financing to access their career goals. What that really means, how that's useful, is I'm a student. I know that if I go to coding bootcamp, I have a chance to move away from my minimum wage job into something that pays me better. But it's very hard for me to do that without taking out a massive loan or swiping my credit card. As a company, Climb helps that person because we understand that they have a better outcome coming for them at the end of that course. Therefore, we can offer them a way to access the financing that they need to get the education that they need, to get the job that they need. Ultimately, our customer doesn't care that we use AI or that we use fancy underwriting methods to figure out how we get them a better rate. They just care that we can help them afford to go to school and get the career they want. That's the useful piece. That makes it lasting. That attracts great people. Similarly, today with ResiDesk, the sort of high level way to say it is that we are AI powered but human enabled customer service for rentals. What that really means is that if you rent an apartment, you have invariably experienced the frustration that is customer service when your sink is leaking or a cabinet door is broken or when you don't know where to pay your rent. And what we do is give you a place to sort of text your concerns and we answer them. As a renter, I don't care that ResiDesk uses AI to do this. I don't care that ResiDesk is integrated into my company's property management system. I just care that my apartment, whenever there's a problem, somebody is able to fix it, and whenever I'm happy about it, somebody's there to sort of talk to so that I can figure out how to keep living in this place. So again, to me, operating principle is almost every great product is useful. I don't just mean that in a utilitarian way. I mean that it is providing some value in their lives, and then you work backwards from there to create the right type of product and company and team for it.
Yeah, look, so at my company, a part of our mission is actually to help fintech companies to develop software solutions, and we serve fintechs specifically because we want to improve the financial health for individuals and companies. Okay,
Exactly.
And we help many companies to improve their software products, and with that we have a mission to improve the financial health and of individuals and companies. So can we say that you actually try to find the purpose for each particular product that you're involved in the creation of?
Absolutely. I would go a step further. I think without defining the purpose, the product is oftentimes just a solution in search of a problem. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes you want to explore. Sometimes it is important to dive into technology to understand what it can do and then find its purpose. But in reality, especially in fintech and in my current vertical that is prop tech and certain other verticals like healthcare, the problems are already the important problems for the most part are actually well understood, and therefore starting a product implies that you already have found the purpose, because if you haven't, then it is just simply too hard to make something that works.
So look, having the experience with different fintech products, so with BlackRock, which is more like enterprise level analytics, and going forward, with more startup like environment and building the new product from scratch for ResiDesk. So why actually fintech? So was it for purpose for you, or just historically? So why fintech?
It's not like I chose fintech. I think it's more that as if you listen to literally every podcast or anything about fintech, everything is fintech, right? Ultimately today, for a lot of people, their financial health is impacted by almost every decision in their life, and therefore, why not fintech was ultimately the question for me, which is it has the biggest sort of exposure to things that have the chance to improve folks' lives, because it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Chances are it involves a financial transaction. And so being able to be in the middle of that means that you have the greatest opportunity to impact small and large parts of your users' lives, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're buying a musical instrument or a painting or trying to take out a loan or trying to pay your rent or trying to manage your money. Fintech at this point is almost less of a vertical and more of a horizontal.
Okay. So look, I agree with you. Like we need to have a purpose for each particular product. Okay, not just like solve some niche problem and that's it. But we need to find the purpose. Okay, first, and you and me like leaders of companies, so we understand that. Sometimes it's a bit hard to to translate this vision to your team members. However, still you need to have a strong team. You need to build this strong engineering culture in your software development team. So how do you actually build this strong engineering culture, translating this purpose to your team members?
So that's a great question. The answer is less sexy than you think, which is I think it starts with just simplifying and repeating why your product matters to your customer. So again, to us, ultimately, all that matters with Residesk is the renter has a better experience at their apartment. You want to try and find an angle about the customer that your team can relate to. And again, we're fortunate because everybody at some point in their lives has rented an apartment for the most part, and so they understand. It's similar with with client credit. Like for us, it was everybody knows the pain of taking out financing to go get the education that they need, and so from that point, I think the most important thing is to keep repeating as a leader why we do the work that we do, because you want to empower your team with that alignment so that they can then be free to go make decisions about how they implement the solutions to those problems. Of course, I can imagine that if you're working on some very specific niche stuff, of course, it can be a little harder because not everybody who builds a product can also be a user of the product. But even there, you just want to keep realigning folks to the vision of what the company is going to do, right? Like if you're building a company that makes it easier to create a digital credit cards so that other people can use it, focus it on the fact that because you're building this, people will be able to afford and buy the things that they need without having to be blocked on that. Like that's and how that impacts their lives. So I think it requires us as leaders to have a very strong perspective on why we are doing this, and then for us to do the work of continuing to repeat and being consistent about the why. And then when you have that, it's maybe not one time, but maybe not two times, but over a week, over a month, over a year, as your team hears you align to that, they start understanding that that's not just a thing that you say to be aligned to a user mission, but really a value that you live, right? It's when they see you making those trade-offs about prioritizing something that matters to a customer, or understanding that even when you have a great feature, it's not ready to be shipped yet because if a customer doesn't understand it, it doesn't make sense. Things like that. When they see you make hard trade-offs in favor of serving the customer, that's when I think that's when I think, and certainly when I was an employee, that's where I was inspired to stay aligned to the mission.
So look, there are different engineers, and some of them
Yep.
they really buy the idea of the product, and they work for for the purpose. The other they more focused on actually building their career by accomplishing different technical challenges. So like technical challenges are more important for them rather than the idea of the product, the market they're serving. So they just want to implement some challenging technical things. So like in your teams, what's the balance between those different types of engineers who build the products because of the purpose and who actually build the product because they have these technical challenges? So what's your approach of like selecting different team members of that types?
Great question. So I think it varies by scale. And I'm kind of going to walk through this backwards because I think at an early stage company, I think you want folks who are just really just focused on the product and the customer. It is very hard, to be very frank, to have the scope to just be a purely technical, challenge-focused person at a very early stage company. Residesk is like 7 people. So like we don't have the kinds of projects that would attract that person. We might contract with them, but rarely full-time employee. I think that goes closer and closer towards 50-50 at like a medium stage company. So say, between 50 and 300 employees. And then as you go further and further, of course, that becomes more of the role of product. And then you have maybe a few product focused engineers. And then most engineers there are focused on technical challenges. That also tends to be the nature of the jobs that are available, right? Like, because a lot of hard technical problems kind of follow 2 paths. One is problems that only happen at scale, which by definition doesn't happen at the early stage usually, or problems that are really interesting technically because nobody has solved them before. And of course, for me at a startup, those problems definitely exist, right? And so what you want to do is you have to be skilled, especially if you want to have engineers like that on your team, and sometimes you do need them. You have to be skilled at then translating why the hard user problem is also a hard technical problem, right? It's never, if you do a 2x2 of easy hard user problems and easy hard technical problems, it's not that hard user problems are always easy technical problems, right? Like hard problems are just hard. So in most cases, there is a hard technical angle just as much as there is a hard product angle. That said, at a very early stage company, it is very hard to just be somebody who wants to solve technical challenges, because even if that is your primary job, you will be working on things that are much simpler problems that just matter a lot more to the company.
So speaking about the strong engineering culture, which is very important to build the really great products. So the other argument I'm having with different CTOs is about whether to have the remote teams or sit in one room with all the team members. And before the lockdown, many companies, many fintechs, they tend to sit in the same room saying, hey, we can have this strong engineering culture only if everybody sits in the same room and build the same product. So we don't have miscommunication. So we don't need to have like many different this online meetings. So we see each other. We can talk when we need to talk. But with lockdown and post-COVID times, the things change, and there are like 2 groups of different people. So like the one, they say, so we need to sit in one office and be like a team only physically, like and in one place to build the strong culture. The others say, okay, we can do like 100% remote teams, and sitting in different parts of the world. And if they have purpose and they have good communicational skills, so it doesn't matter actually where you sit. So you can have perfect online meetings like we have with you right now.
Right.
So what's your approach in this case?
My approach is definitely I think it's less about in-person and remote and more about synchronous versus asynchronous. And it's possible to be synchronous while you're remote, if you're in the same time zone. It's also completely possible to be asynchronous and in office if I have my headphones on, you have my headphones on, we're in the same space, but we never talk to each other and we're just like slacking each other all day. So to me, the perspective is heads down work tends to be better remote, and collaboration tends to be better in person or synchronous. So our approach has always been, I think you do your work the way that you are best suited to do your work. For some people, that's needing an office, and for some people, that's being in a different place every day. But when we ideate together, we are in the same location, as far as we can possibly do it. So, a team that meets once a month in the same location and then works however they want to get their jobs done, with sufficient sort of virtual touch points in the middle has been sort of our approach. And that's actually been a thing even pre-pandemic, even since BlackRock, where we had, of course, offices in many locations and teams spread across many locations. You have to be this way to begin with. So that's been an interesting transition because, in a lot of ways, like it feels like that's always been the way that I've preferred to work, and so that's only been solidified since remote work became even more feasible.
Mm-hmm. So look, there are several layers. So the one layer is actually physical presence and remote. The other layer is also the time zone, and you mentioned the time zone. And
Yeah,
there are teams that actually sits in the same time zone, and they can be
yeah,
remote, but sits in the same time zone. There are teams that actually sits in different time zones.
yeah.
So, do you think? I mean, like, what's your experience like working with different time zones and the same time zone? Can we make the different time zones efficient? So, what's your experience here?
So the same time zone definitely makes a lot of things easier. To me, time zones are really a symptom. The question you're trying to solve is overlap, right? Which is that if you and I are working together, we need reason to have some reasonable overlap so that you and I can discuss things, ask each other questions, or even just hang out online, right? Like team bonding is also just as important. And so what has been interesting for me, I think initially I certainly used to struggle a little bit with teams in different time zones, especially when they didn't have much overlap. So, like West Coast versus, say, Asia is a little bit difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And what has changed since lockdown, I think, has been the fact that since more people are working remotely anyway, the set times at each time zones have become a bit more flexible, which means you can almost always, unless you're in some really impossible time zone like, I don't know, Singapore and San Francisco. Um,
Okay.
Even that actually kind of makes sense. Maybe more like Eastern Europe and San Francisco is a difficult one sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find a way to have, at least 2 or 3 hours of overlap, then you can be, of course, a little bit more structured about just making sure you touch base during those 2, 3 hours, and you can make it work for you. Um, with the same time zone, of course, there's just less stuff that you have to think about. In that, I know that as long as I'm online or you're online, you know, I can ask you whatever question I have. But the most important thing I think is to be intentional about the overlap of the time zones, and make sure that everybody is good with that. Sometimes that means you might start a little bit earlier in one time zone or finish a little bit earlier later in another time zone, and those things can change. But if you start with that mentality, I think you can make almost any time zone work. Almost.
So, but for you, what works for you better? Like the same time zone, different time zones? Can you explain what's?
For us, I think a lot of our team is on the same time zone. At
Mm-hmm.
Residesk, that's sort of how we've operated. It's also a smaller team, so we're
Mm-hmm.
really only talking about a handful of folks. At Climb, I think we had folks across multiple, 2 different time zones. And at
Mm-hmm.
BlackRock, we actually had folks across 4 different time zones. I can see how all of those are effective because ultimately with all of them, we just had to be very intentional about the overlap. Right now, it's just a thing that we don't have to deal with because we're in the same time zone. But I can see as we expand, us sort of working with other folks. Because ultimately, if you have somebody that is really good and wants to be part of your team and you want them to be part of your team, then you can make it work. But if you're in the same time zone, things get significantly simpler.
So you mentioned that actually CTO needs to communicate a lot. Okay, so to synchronize all the team members, like sitting in one time zone, in different time zone. Anyway, you need to spend, lots of time on the meetings. So what's your experience here? Like how do you specifically share your time between meetings, communication, some hands-on work? So how do you split your time right now, specifically for the ResiDesk, when you're still like in the early stage of building the product and developing the company?
Yeah. So now I think is this stage I think is the easiest to manage your time because there's really only two things, maybe three things that really matter. Number one is all of your meetings are with your customers or potential customers. So it's all product research and development. That happens on their time, right? Like your customers' time matters more than anything else. Number two is aligning what you're learning with the team and communicating what you're learning to the team so that you're all aligned on the problems you're trying to solve. And then number three is sort of heads down work. Again, with a startup, you kind of accept the fact that none of your time is really your time, which is totally fine because that's what you sign up for. I have the luxury of being able to just move my heads down time to wherever it fits in the calendar. The non-negotiables are learning from customers and making sure that we communicate that to the team on a very, very, very frequent cadence. So I would say most of the regular office hours time is spent on either customer conversations or internal sort of knowledge sharing, which counterintuitively I think is even more important in a very small company than it is in a super large company because you would think that once you say something to a group of like 5 people, they probably know enough to move forward that week. But the reality is also in a small company, things change really fast. And so you want to be very proactive with your communication. And then heads down time, I think the way I look at it is on a day that is full of sort of customer and internal meetings, heads down time is whenever I can get it. And on days when I am not full of internal customer meetings, then you block whole days off. Right. I think one big difference with today versus I think how it was at Climb or at BlackRock for me is I'm much less organized about my hours and much more organized about my days. So I know as an example that today, outside of our call, is really a heads down day for me because today I don't have any customer conversations versus tomorrow I know that I'm going to be in demos and client meetings all day long. They might move a little bit up and down during the day, but I roughly know I have a plan for the week. I don't necessarily have a plan for each hour. At Climb, it was much more different because I would have set meetings that recur a lot through the week, and then I would plan my heads down and my internal team time around that. So that's definitely been an interesting shift, and I think one that has actually been very conducive to staying in the flow state, both for heads down work, but also for like product work, like synthesizing your customer conversations and turning them into potentially good product decisions for the company.
So do you have CTO and in your company right now? Like, or is it your role as well?
Yeah.
So
it's
you
tech
share
and product. Yeah.
So you share the responsibility for tech and product for both of the functions. So
that's right.
My question is actually, why is it so? So do you believe this is more efficient than having 2 different persons in this role, like product and technology, because as I see right now in different companies, the approach can be different. So some companies, they say, no, we will have like two different people, one responsible for product, the other responsible for implementation and technology. Some companies, they say, no, we will have the one merged role. And because, for some reasons, like this will be one guy who is responsible for product, talking to clients, and also for implementations. So why actually you share the role of tech and product?
So I think the boring answer is that it depends on the company and the person. I think the answer for us has been that's sort of where my skill set lies. If I think about sort of where I add most value to my team and my company as a founder, it is in being able to have those conversations and synthesize them very quickly using both my skills and my team skills into a working product, and then continuing that feedback loop with the customer. As the company scales up, that can become much more of a product role than a technology role. At Climb also, I had both roles. And then when I started ResiDesk, we chose to sort of turn that role into two roles because of the folks that we had in those roles at the time, where they wanted to have specific focus areas. I think in general, for the most part, companies also prefer splitting those roles because they like to have a little bit of a healthy tension between engineering priorities and product priorities. Because in a lot of companies, having only product run the show means that your infrastructure suffers, and having only engineering run the show means that your customer suffers, and neither of those is a good outcome.
Okay.
But depending on the individual, at least sort of for where I know my strengths are as a leader, I believe that this is sort of where I add the most value, because and this goes back to the very first question you asked me, which is about making products useful. The thing that motivates me most of all is creating that feedback loop where a customer tells us something that we learn from, create a product, ship it back to the customer, continue to learn, and so on and so forth. And you solve this problem, then you move on to the next, and then move on to the next. And then all of that sort of coalesces into a larger sort of problem-solving exercise. Had it been somebody else with maybe a more pure product mindset or a more pure technical mindset, then I think we would probably have split those roles too. The reality also is that at the very early stages, it doesn't matter what your title is, everybody's doing everything, right? Like if you're talking to a customer, you are at the same time having to sell your product, having to learn about their problems, and having to figure out how you can marry those two things to create something useful. So, so that's sort of our approach.
You don't do the programming parts yourself, can you?
I do. And again, that's just a function of the early stage, right?
So, like you're wearing like lots of hats, like product and also tech leader, and also doing the coding work. Okay, let's put it this way. Isn't it too much? Like, and you mentioned that maybe some area can suffer. How can you have the balance here?
I think of it less as a balance and more like a synthesis. The question is, for any company, the fundamental question is, can you turn customer problems into value, right? And that loop is always understanding, synthesizing, implementing, deploying, feedback, and then it starts again, right? In a startup, you actually want that loop to be as tight as possible. And when you have, both for myself and one of our co-founders, we both do both things. And so that means we have very little sort of context switching happening because we tend to be more like multi-skilled folks. Again, this is a very different challenge from Climb, where it was a sort of a bigger scale company, and certainly a much different challenge from BlackRock, where at that scale, when you're solving those types of problems, you need specialists. At the very early stage, generalists tend to be much better at closing the feedback loop between the customer and the product. So I fully expect that today this works, because, and the other thing that we haven't talked about is that the cost of creating technology has gone down from here to here very quickly, to the point where most things, getting to the V0.5 or V1 of most things is actually very fast if you know how to do it. Getting to V2 is your next stage, and getting to V3 is your next stage.
Right.
Those are the things that take more people to solve the right problems. So I would consider it as, at this stage of our evolution, this is the balance that works for us. At the next stage of our evolution, I'm sure it will change.
So speaking about somebody who is responsible for technology and implementation, like a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. So do you believe the CTO must be the best coder, the coolest programmer in the company? Or
No,
it's a
absolutely not.
It's more leadership and management role? And what do you think?
Well, there are three things that you said. I will unpack them, I guess, separately. I don't think they should be the best coder in the company, at least not at any sort of real scale of team. Sure, when it's the first 2 engineers or the first 3 engineers in the company, it can totally happen. Not when you're at 10 or 20 or 50 or 100, because if you're the best engineer in the company, like, that's where you add the most value. You should just focus on that. Because it's actually much harder to build things than to be a CTO. Don't tell anybody I said that. I think there's 2 other things you mentioned, which is leadership and management. And that's a role that I sort of see splitting depending on different companies, right? Like, some companies have the CTO focus specifically on technology leadership. They're very external focused. They go to conferences, they do hiring, and they might have a small team under them to focus on special projects, but the management is sort of handed off to, say, a VP of engineering, who really has the bulk of the engineering team with them. And some companies choose not to split that. I personally believe that the leadership aspect of a CTO is much more important than the management aspect. That doesn't mean you should be a bad manager, but it does mean that if your headcount scales quickly, then it does help, for most cases, for the CTO to continue focusing on implementing the technology strategy for the company, and have somebody help them with the people management if the way that they need to grow their impact is by scaling headcount. If the way that they grow their impact is by really focusing on technology, then they can handle, all of those hats together.
So are you more leader or manager right now?
Today, I think I'm definitely more leader, because at the small scale, like, management is much less of an issue. Leadership is much more important, right? Alignment is much more important
the difference?
than performance reviews.
So once again, what's the difference for yourself between leader and manager?
A leader is really focused on aligning everybody in the company towards solving the right problems. A manager is much more focused on making sure that everybody at the company feels supported in their journey, and make sure that that is aligned with sort of, the journey that the company is on. So I think about it as saying, the leader really is involved in making sure that, the engineers understand the why and what we're really focused on and what we're going to be working on over the next, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. The managers are really focused on making sure that the engineers have, the right processes, the right tools, the right cadence of feedback, the right compensation, things that are both a combination of process and people skills, and just as important, coaching, right? Like, leadership can be about showing you where we need to go, aligning on why we need to get there, and talking through how we need to get there. But coaching is much more of a one-to-one exercise, right? And I believe fairly firmly that management is actually one of the most important things you can be doing, right? Like, the old rule of, like, every person who reports to you should be 20% of your time, means that as soon as you scale out of that number, I think you do yourself and the company a disservice by trying to manage too many people at once. And just as the CTO is also the representative of the company externally, they're the representative of the company on the executive team, right? So all of that encompasses leadership responsibilities, versus the management responsibilities are really with interfacing with the team. So as you scale, that tends to be a lot.
All right.
Unlike writing code, you can't manage people in your downtime.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. So look, you mentioned this product feedback loop, okay? And you're on the residential real estate market now. And we have seen some disruption for sure during the last year, which started last year, like on the financial markets, but specifically on the real estate market. So how did the market of residential real estate change during the last year, and how this whole situation affects your business? And you talk to many clients.
Great question.
So...
Yes. So real estate is really, to me, real estate ultimately is just another version of fintech, right? Like if you think about it, it's a giant interest rate driven market with a very particular asset class. So to me, it's almost just its own vertical of fintech. The one difference between how real estate operates and how a lot of the rest of the markets operate is that real estate tends to operate on a much more cyclical basis with longer cycles. And so just like anything, people take out loans to buy assets, improve them, create cash flows, and then sell them back to the market. It's just that in the case of residential real estate, that happens on 5-year cycles. So everything that happens in the sort of macro markets also happens in real estate, just maybe on a slightly different scale and on slightly more of a lag. So with that said, much like the general markets over the last few years, right? When the pandemic hit, there was certainly a ton of uncertainty around what was going to happen, followed by a very large boom of people increasing online spending, working from home, which meant that a lot of folks in this market had the ability to access a lot of almost essentially free capital to go buy properties all over the country, really all over the world, and try and get people to live there, because guess what? Everybody was working from home. And effectively, they had almost an unlimited budget to keep adding amenities and keep adding headcount to help manage those properties, because everybody always had to stay at home and there's only a finite number of properties. And so rents kept going up and up and up and up. And just like the markets, there has since been a cool down as interest rates have risen. And there has been a very strong focus on operational efficiency, where now, instead of focusing really on amenities and offers and benefits to residents and increasing rents, now the focus is on managing your headcount and making sure that your process is streamlined, and making sure that you're collecting your rents on time, and that you are managing them at a rate where residents don't just move out because the rent is too high. So again, it's almost the market has gone like this, real estate has gone like this, right? Just bigger and more of a lag. How that affects us particularly is that we ultimately are a product that helps you up-level and enhance your customer service, and then through that create a lot of touch points with renters. So we're almost counter-cyclical in that sense, because when the market is going great and anybody is willing to rent from you at any price at any time, you almost don't need to focus on customer service because your product sells itself. As we now know, that's usually a temporary state of affairs. And when you move past that state of affairs, it's really important to focus on how you can continue delivering great customer service without necessarily being able to hire as many people or put as much money into amenities and benefits. And that's sort of really where we've been able to, I think, have very strong responses from customers, because who doesn't want to do, less spending for more work done?
So look, once again, you're a customer data platform. Can we say that you're a customer data platform?
That's certainly part of it, yes.
Okay, but also, are you a SaaS platform for managing the real estate property business or not?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded term in this space because I think there's a lot of platforms
Mm-hmm.
that say they are management platforms or properties. The way we think about it is this: there are so
Mm-hmm.
usually when a customer asks that, we say no, and the reason we say that is this: there are plenty of well-established existing software players that help you manage your properties and your buildings. We don't
Okay.
play in that space. Those tend to be very sort of robust, well-established accounting platforms that help you manage the health of the building. We help you manage the
Okay.
health of your customer. So we're on the other side. So we think of ourselves, and that's why we don't talk about it as a customer data platform, even though customer data plays a key role in what we do. We are a customer
Mm-hmm.
service platform. And that means think about literally every company in the last 30 years that has grown big, whether it's Apple or Delta or American Express, has had the ability to provide fantastic customer service at a very high efficiency and then leverage what they learn from their customers to improve their business. What we do for real estate is just take those learnings and help them apply it to this vertical. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the way that we think about it. You have software to manage your property. You don't have software to manage your renters.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we help you do.
Okay, so does it mean that you built also integrations with the property management software? So can
Exactly. And this is,
can you
yeah.
tell us what kind of integrations have you done?
How much time do you have? Every kind of integration. So
Lots of.
this is, um,
Okay.
yeah, this is very much again like the parallels between you know sort of straight up fintech and proptech are actually much deeper than they seem on surface. Again, just
Mm-hmm.
like fintech, with the credit bureaus and the banks, there are many sort of existing platforms in property management that you need to integrate with. And just like in fintech, some people have fantastic APIs that allow for pulling information and pushing information on a real-time basis. Others still have weird sandboxes with SOAP APIs, and others still have no APIs. And just like in fintech, the approach that you want to take is one that makes it feel seamless to your customer. So our customers, they usually pick a management system for their properties and they will stick with it almost forever, right? They don't pick it on the basis of the level of integration that it offers with other software. And in fact, for a lot of these systems, they're almost incentivized not to offer integrations because their business tends to be about adding
Mm-hmm.
each new feature that somebody comes up with as a startup back into their platform as a vertical and then upcharging for it. So for us, our challenge has always been, okay, at the very least, we should be able to have a one-way report-based integration. We will sometimes just use robotic process automation to do that. We're not above that. Sometimes it's just scheduled emails. And then where the platforms offer it, then we integrate with anything that is available via API, right? Like for us, the goal is the more we can integrate, the better it is, because the more context we have on you as a renter, the better we can serve you and answer your questions, and then sort of share that information back with the property so that they have good information. So that's our sort of guiding approach to integration, is that there's always like an acceptable minimum that you can get from reports. And then based on what the platform offers, we will scale
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to sort of real-time two-way API integrations.
Okay, so look, in fintech, actually, the integrations strategy is very important because you actually need to fit yourself into the whole ecosystem and create and add value actually, to this to the value
Yeah.
chain. So, what are
Yeah.
the most critical integrations specifically for you? With what type of software? Like with property management or maybe with data
Yeah.
providers? So what is that?
The most, and it's not even close, the most important integrations in this industry are with the sort of horizontal property management software systems.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many of them, but there's really only like 4 or 5 that have the majority of the market share. So it's companies like Yardi, Entrata, Appfolio, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure, like nobody in this industry will talk to you unless you integrate with their property management system. if it's one of the big 4 or 5. For the rest, you still have to integrate, but that integration can just be give me an account into the system so that I can schedule a report to send myself. And so those matter the most by far. Then the secondary integrations, whether it's with other prop tech systems or other players, tend to be far less important. So that's one big difference between, I think, fintech and prop tech, is that in fintech, it matters that you're integrated with as many parts of the value chain as you possibly can. In prop tech, the most important source and the most important sink in the value chain is the property management system. Even if you don't integrate with all the other players in the chain, you can rest assured that they are all pulling from the property management system and pushing back to it. And to the customer, they only really experience all of these platforms through their property management system. So that's the game that you have to play. Like with fintech, there are a lot of players in the value chain that try to take over that value of the property management system and try to replace it. But that has not been a winning strategy so far in this industry. It is actually much easier to integrate with it and then try and provide value on your own axis across something that the property management system doesn't try to do.
Okay. So look, you say that you actually use AI and natural language processing to analyze the financial data. And so can you explain us more details? So what kind of data actually you populate into your system, and then what kind of insights you can provide to your clients?
Absolutely. So it's not financial data, at least it's not strictly financial data, right? We are a customer service platform. So the data that we are generating that is unique to us is the fact that we have hundreds and thousands of conversations between buildings and residents happening every day on our platform. So if you think about it, the property management systems and the accounting systems actually have perfect financial data for these properties, which is fantastic when you look at projections and when you look back at your performance. What it's not great at is helping you make decisions that will help you, keep your customers, increase your rents, improve your retention, or improve your conversion. And for all of that to make sense, you actually have to look at a lot of qualitative data. This is the equivalent of this today before ResiDesk was a survey that somebody would fill out, 10% of the time to ask, are you happy at the property, versus, us creating a whole year of history of conversation. Now, because all of this conversation is text-based, you can see that there is a very natural sort of fit for, for generative text as well as NLP across all of this, all the way from understanding the sentiment of resident conversations to knowing when somebody went from being an unhappy resident to being a happy resident, to knowing what types of issues are common for me as a resident versus you as a resident, across a building, across a portfolio, across a state, across a country, across competitors, across asset classes. Those are the slices of data that we deal with. And that's sort of where we really put a lot of our sort of NLP sort of tech to bear, right? Because if you can understand what customers want, then you can build it for them. Oops, excuse me.
Bless you. So,
thank you.
So you actually store all the conversations happening between and clients and the service desk, and based on the analysis of these conversations, you can predict whether they actually analyze and predict whether this customer, what the chance to retain the specific customer. Okay,
that's right.
Is it correct?
Yeah.
And
it's the specific customer, but much more importantly, probabilistically across the property.
Okay. And how do you connect this with the net operating income, actually, forecasting the net operating income? This prediction.
So that's where the integration with the property management system really comes in, because then once we understand and we break these conversations down into separate facets, right, we can then correlate them back into the line items in the property's pro forma, right? Whether that is, amenity costs, projected retention, projected conversion, projected vacancy, projected sort of headcount costs, and so on and so forth. When you talk about net operating income, of course, that is the bottom line number. But the reality is you can't directly affect the net operating income. It is the sum total of all of these factors. We know that the factors that we measure at some level will go back and talk to the line items that they have on their performance. So as an example, if most of the residents at a property are complaining about the Wi-Fi, we can go tell them, oh, hey, $100,000 capital investment in Wi-Fi will help you improve retention rates by this much, which will have an impact on your NOI by this much. Similarly, if most people at the property are really happy with the staff, we can go tell them you've actually budgeted for a really high headcount growth over the next year. You're actually correctly staffed at this property already, which means you can take away those salary costs and that will impact your NOI, right? I think one of the things that everybody in property management talks about is how they impact NOI. But the most important thing is NOI is a compound result of multiple singular factors. So what's really important for us is breaking down what we are learning and correlating it back to those factors. I will also just be very clear to say it is not an exact science because property management is not an exact science, right? Every property is a little bit different. What really matters is directionally, I may not be able to tell you that, I, as this resident at this property, will definitely renew because you cannot perfectly predict human behavior. But I can tell you that if you improve the Wi-Fi at this building, 60% of your residents who were complaining about it will now turn into 20% or 10%, which gives you a much higher chance of retaining the other 40%.
So how accurate is your model right now? Do you have any numbers or do you have any KPIs for that?
So it does vary quite a bit by asset class and property. I would say we are most accurate for like properties at scale. So as soon as we know that properties have over 500 units, for customers who have over 500 units under management, typically our customers have 10,000 to 100,000 units. We know fairly predictably the level of impact that we will have at the property, whether that is how we improve their reviews, which really matters for conversion, right? Like I think the correlation is that every half star you improve on Google results in a 5-point improvement in conversion, which is actually pretty high. We have a very accurate read on who's going to stay and who's going to leave. We are still working, I would say, on correlating that back into specific NOI. And part of that is our customers kind of intuitively understand, as long as we can correlate it to the right factors, what their actual budget impact will be on NOI. That is, of course, the most variable because every building is managed a little bit differently. But we can tell you, hey, your Wi-Fi costs are this much. We can improve it by this much, and things like that. What folks really do care about, though, is the last piece that I mentioned, which is how much time we actually save them by managing the customer service in a much more efficient way, and the factor that has on their headcount costs. I think we tend to have across every property type, we tend to save them the equivalent of at least one full-time employee per property, and so that ends up being the biggest impact line item on their budget. From a resident standpoint, even more so than each of these things, that we can predict with fairly high accuracy. For everything else, it is property dependent, but we know the results we can drive as far as what the impact of those results is on NOI. It is meaningful, but it varies quite a bit by property, depending on, a property that has really high amenity ratings really cares a lot about making sure that every amenity is up to par. A property that is not amenity focused, just really wants to provide the basics, cares a lot more that, they don't have to staff, 2x next year. So that's the way that we think about it. We have a predictable impact on a number of factors. Which of those factors will be really important to your NOI is a question that we ask our customers so that we can focus on that, but that varies quite a bit.
So look, CB Insights named 3 trends for this year. So the one is actually YouTube, the other is generative AI, and the other one is enterprise SaaS. So let's talk about generative AI a little bit. So everybody are playing with the chat GPT, etc., etc. And as soon as you're in the customer service, and many said like, hey, this will disrupt the customer service. Okay, so like, we will get rid of maybe all of or a huge portion, of team members on the customer desk. So what do you think? So how can you augment the customer service with the generative AI? Do you have anything in your backlog already specifically to implement or not?
It's all we've been doing for the last 4 months. Literally for us, this quarter is 12 weeks of AI, which means we're shipping a new feature, at least one new feature every week that helps us with our customer service team. I agree and disagree with that read, I guess, to start with on generative AI. I think it is less of a replacement and more of a co-pilot, especially for the types of customer service that we do, right? Now, I think when, that CB Insights trend, I think when it talks about customer service, it talks about it quite broadly. The reality is most customer service use cases are quite narrow and therefore quite straightforward to automate or at least mostly replace with AI, right? Like there's only so many questions you can have when you lose your credit card. There's only so many questions you can have when you're trying to rebook a flight. However, there are certain sections of customer service such as in healthcare, such as in PropTech for us, where the product that you're providing the service for is inherently infinitely complex, right? So there's no end to the number of problems or questions you can have about your apartment. And therefore, we think of it as a co-pilot, not as an autopilot. So what that means for us in our product is we use generative AI to help not just create one big feature in the product, but to enhance every touch point we have with a customer. So what that means is, when we onboard a new customer that's a property, we have, we take their welcome packet that they send to residents, which has most of the FAQs. Here's the emergency number. Here's the email. Here's how you book an amenity. Here's how you pay your rent. We ingest that into a vector database, and we use GPT to ask it questions, so that when you ask me the question of, hey, I forgot where to pay my rent, I can auto-generate a response that will give you the answer to that. And I can answer that for you many, many, many times over without ever having to involve a human in it. We also use it to help break down problems, right? Like when you have to understand that customer service in PropTech is a very emotional thing. When somebody's upset about something that's happening in their home, it's not like a straightforward ticketing process. It's not like, I have this problem and this problem and this problem, therefore I'm going to create this ticket and this ticket and this ticket. If you've ever been on the phone with somebody who's really unhappy with their product, you know that they're just going to unload all of their problems on you at once. Generative AI, again, is very, very good at taking those compound problems, breaking them down into simpler workflows so that we can then address them one by one, because the property manager is working off of a ticketing system to solve things. Customers don't care about your ticketing system. Again, talking about making things useful. That gap can be solved by AI helping a human synthesize the problem and turning it into tangible issues. Again, when a customer says they have a problem, there's usually very little detail, right? They might just tell you, hey, my sink is broken. Okay, what does it mean? Or my dryer is broken. What does that mean? Is the dryer not running? Is it not switching on? Is it running too hot? Is it not taking enough loads? Is it like clogging up? All of these things are difficult. But if you ask the customer automatically to say, send us a picture and answer these two questions for me, you can use AI to analyze that picture, understand the key components, take those two answers and create a detailed generated ticket that can help the customer understand, hey, actually, the problem is not with the dryer. Don't send a technician. The problem is with the outlet, so send an electrician, right? Again, very, very like basic problem solving that needed, two humans to go visit the apartment, check out what the problem was, can be done with AI. It also does a lot of the other stuff that GPT is very good at. And I'm, bringing up GPT here because, of course, that's the flavor of the day. But really, most generative AI does this is help us be empathetic to the customer, right? Like maintain a certain tone. So when you work with the luxury building, they have certain brand guidelines that you want to use, right? You can take those brand guidelines and have GPT rewrite your responses in the tone of the property, right? So it's a lot of small things that are turning, everybody who uses our product into very efficient yet very sort of human customer service folks. So to us, I think again, when you have a narrow customer service use case, you can put AI and turn it into autopilot. But when you have a broad use case, the goal is to take AI and turn it into a co-pilot, help it solve a lot of simple problems, and then leave the complex problems to the humans. That doesn't mean it can't help. That just means it helps break it down and try and make it as structured and as simple as possible. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter who's using generative AI or not. The resident cares that their home is usable, and the property management team cares that they're trying to fix the important problems and not fixing useless problems. AI and software solves the gaps in the middle, and it solves them not by doing one thing, but by doing a lot of things that work well in harmony with each other.
Yes, I agree with you. Like we have found it very helpful with GPT, for example, to get the specific options and to expand actually the context of the problem.
Exactly.
So when the user sends you maybe just few words, hey, I have this kind of problem, and GPT suggests you like, hey, probably there could be problems with that and that and that. So like it expand the context for you, and you can use these different options actually to make the decision how you can serve the client in better way and maybe choose between different options. So we have found
Exactly.
this use case very efficient application for GPT right now.
Yeah, and again, the technology is moving very fast. So maybe in 6 months' time, it's going to be very different conversation. But again, we think that the approach is, I don't think any pure AI play can exist in the space today. That's not to say it can exist in the space soon. But I certainly think that there are very few pure services plays left in this space unless they are using AI to augment themselves, because it now just makes too much sense to ignore using it.
So aside of the generative AI, so let's open our crystal ball for a while and look into the future. So what do you believe is one trend in the property management and in the property management ecosystem that you can actually leverage in 2023 for Residesk?
I think it's the fact that for the first time in a very, very long time, companies in the space are focused on operational efficiency, right? This has been, much like healthcare, a space that has stayed far away from technology for many good reasons and some bad reasons. Mostly because I think a lot of technology players in the space have tried and failed to replace the existing systems without realizing the breadth, right? Like it's like in fintech, how many companies do you see every year that try to replace Excel? And ultimately they do something else and create an Excel plugin. That's what the property management systems have been in this space for a very long time. And whoever's tried to replace them has not had much success. The trend towards operational efficiency, the reason these things are correlated is because since those players failed so spectacularly in this market, this industry has been actually quite hesitant to adopt any new software. And because of this renewed focus on operational efficiency, the mindset of the industry has changed again, and they're much more willing to explore software solutions, with the obvious caveat that they don't really want software to look like software. They want software to feel like services, right? So we have a joke at the company that SaaS here stands for services as software, not software as a service.
Okay.
In that, to the property manager and to the renter, you might be building software, but they want it to feel like a human is providing them a service. And the focus on operational efficiency means that they are much more willing to consider companies that are willing to give them that experience, because it means that it helps them, save on headcount, do things more efficiently, scale themselves better, manage their budgets better, have a better impact on NOI, make sure that they're converting better. There's an endless list of benefits that comes from improving your process, which every other industry in the world has discovered a long time ago. And so that is a really encouraging trend, because for the very longest time, being in property management meant that you picked a process once and then you did it for the next 35 years until you retire. You never change anything ever, 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 ever. And that has shifted since the pandemic, and certainly going to 2023. People are either looking to scale up their business or scale down their cost. And both of those things can only really be done if you're focused on process, technology, and software. So that is a shift that has happened almost irreversibly in this industry, which means now is a great time for a lot of companies to really sort of focus on how you can serve this market, right? Like earlier, prop tech really just used to be prop services, and now it's actually becoming prop tech.
All right. So improve your operational efficiency, improve your customer service. And I agree. It's time for lots of companies to focus not only just on growth, but actually optimizing their operational efficiency. And I agree also with the co-pilot concept that technology not only like just generative AI, like some disruptive things, but also just automating different business processes that are still not automated in different parts of fintech and in property management as well. So I agree with you, like focusing on this, like improving, we call it improving innovation, like, and we optimize operational efficiency with many small things, and eventually we actually decrease the cost of total ownership of your technology and your operations.
Yep. Yeah. It's a good time, I think, for any company that wants to help businesses run more efficiently. And so while, of course, we're going through, I think, a very interesting and turbulent time for companies and technology, especially, and overall in the markets, some things never change, right? Helping your customer make more money with less cost has never changed, and it will continue to not change. So as long as you can do that, I think there are many great businesses to be built.
Cool. All right, Arjun. So thank you very much for this talk and for this
Thank
podcast.
you.
So
it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was pleasure to talk. With you, and I really believe that improving customer service is a great purpose, and for everyone who watch us. So please leave the comments and your questions in the comments below, and also tell us what do you think about generative AI, and what do you think how we can improve the operational efficiency, and what are the innovations we actually can do in customer service, okay, and how we can optimize the customer service. So I personally agree with you and believe this is very important topic for different types of SaaS platforms and fintech platforms as well. Okay, Arjun, so thank you very much, and see you soon.
Still watching us and have not subscribed yet? Let's fix this. Also, don't forget to like this video and take a look at the other episodes we have. See ya!